Hey, Dr. Garrett. Bobby Tim here, and I'm sorry this is so late. I last week I went through, I'm sure you know the feeling of a grading cycle where I'm reading 115 personal narratives, and I'm immersed in it, and the world around me I don't focus on the world around me. But anyway, I saw on the syllabus that the video 3 was doing, so I'm trying to get this done. Um, so two essays that I think really important to me, and that I just found. One I found in a library at one of the high schools where I teach. It's one of those out of the Bloom books. It was on Greek drama, and the writer is Peter Burian. It's Myth into Mythos: The Shaping of Tragic Plot. And the reason I was interested is because I think Ong talks about that the transition from an oral tradition into a writing tradition, and I'm interested in how an oral and a written tradition leads into a dramatic tradition, and the change in medium. And to use Linda Hutchins' vocabulary, it's, I guess, from telling into showing. I think she talks that in about the second or third chapter. Um, so the reason I like it is because, man, it's the subtitle is Tragedy is Repetition and Innovation. And Hutchin talks about that there's this, we had this debate between the classical idea of imitation versus the modern romantic idea of originality. And he's talking about, and the thing I didn't realize is that the Greek playwrights are working off of a limited repertoire. There are only really certain topics that they're dealing with, and they repeat many of the same plays. If you look at the body of information that we know, um, they're retelling the same stories over and over to an audience that already knows the stories. So I want to do a little bit of work on the Greek audiences, to kind of understand this relationship. And really, there are about four areas that, if I was to reduce kind of what am I interested in, where am I going with this? One, I'm interested in adaptation um, studies and how it deals with literature, because again, a lot of it deals with film. However, there's a part of me also that's interested in the new forms of storytelling today. Um, and then pedagogy. I promise you, I'm working to find it, and I've found some sources dealing with pedagogy. Um, so this is an interesting article, and one of the articles I think has really affected me as just a teacher in general is it's called "The Cultural Evolution of Storytelling and Fairy Tales: Human Communication and Memetics." And I found this source through an introduction to mythology. There's a unit on fairy tales, and then I find that kind of the leading scholar is a guy named Jack Zeitz, and so he's the author of this particular. It's a chapter from his book called "The Irresistible Fairy Tale: The Cultural and Social History of a Genre." Um, and so I think, again, in my intuition saying that it ties into the things that I'm interested in. Um, with that being said, I found out there's an adaptation studies journal, and I think it's a British scholar and a scholar from New Zealand or Australia that kind of work that are publishing a journal. There's a website there, and the way they describe the adaptation studies is film and screen, literary criticism, visual and performing arts, new media, and transmedia storytelling. And they actually have a call for papers and on biography and how that's affected by adaptation, and there's a part of me that would love to write a paper on Cleopatra. There was a great biography written a few number of years ago, and she's basically saying she's a victim of Augustan propaganda that still kind of pervades Western culture today. And one thing that's interesting, and I gotta tell you this, I used to attend the Blackfriars Shakespeare Conference at the American Shakespeare. Let's see, I think it's called the Center, in I'm blanking on the name now, but it's in the middle of Virginia. It's right off the turn of Stanton, Virginia. That's it. And I'd go with my mentor, and gosh, I met Stephen Booth, who has got this incredible book on the sonnets, and Andrew Gurr, who is prominent kind of British Shakespearean, scholar. And boy, did I feel imposter syndrome the whole time. I went three times in 6 years, and I felt imposter syndrome the whole time. I just was quiet and I just listened, to be perfectly honest. But anyway, I remember a presentation done on Antony and Cleopatra, and you had a scholar director from the University of Texas, and a woman. I don't know where she was, a friend of Anne's, tough woman, and she was talking about how Cleopatra is like primary to that play, and how the play ends with her suicide. And so anyway, that's kind of why. Sorry about that tangent. So there's an Oxford Handbook of Adaptation Studies. There's one at MTSU. I'll probably drive down, and yeah, there's a chapter on pedagogy. Um, and there are about four areas I'm interested in. There's Greek theater, which I just kind of talked about, um, and I found that the play Burian's essay talks about. I'd assumed that in a way it's Homer and Hesiod that are influencing them, but it's not really. It's still an oral culture. Again, it kind of, I know common sense, it tells me, it's not like everyone could read books, right? Or there was even publication. So there's still an oral society. And um, it's interesting, again, this limited repertoire and it's common sense that this period is really short. In other words, Greek drama, and I think it's closely tied in with Periclean Athens and democracy, and it eventually kind of dies out. And of course, Aristotle later is writing his Poetics, and Burren kind of challenges a lot of Aristotle's Poetics. And I've got a really good book on theater and theater criticism, and it's like Aristotle's Poetics still pervades criticism, and it was interesting to hear him do that take. Um, so Shakespeare and his sources, that's the thing that kind of grabbed my attention. I think that Hutchin makes that point. She's absolutely right that's it. And I would say there's a dividing line. I mean, most scholars, they've read books on Shakespeare and his adaptation of sources, but high school teachers, do they talk much about? Because in many ways, I mean, I've been there. You're deciphering Elizabethan language a lot, and you want to kind of. I always wanted to hook them on the story, and as a creator of stories, but really is adapting them, right? And I think there's some interesting stories within that, like the whole idea of the Hamlet that Shakespeare is probably working off of, but again, I don't think they know it hadn't been published, that's for sure. Um, so I think that's kind of an interesting kind of bridge into high school teachers. Um, and one of the things that the Blackfriars Theater, I don't know if you're familiar with it, they were inspired by what happened with the Globe and the replica of the Globe, and so the Blackfriars is a replica of Shakespeare's indoor theater, and so I've heard a number of scholars talk about the trend in original practices, and the fact that if you go to a play there, I strongly recommend going to a play there. Um, you walk in, and in the gallery, they actually they all the actors can play music, and they're playing music and singing contemporary songs before the play, and the lights are on, and that's one of the things for all of their productions. They'll have an actor kind of come out in front and say, things are different here, and the fact that the lights are on so the actors see you, and in contemporary modern theaters, it's darkness, right? And so you don't break the fourth wall. And that's one of the things that's radically different, is that the fourth wall is part of the theater. It's um, you have patrons sitting, for a higher price on the stage. So how much does that influence the playwriting? Because uh, the actors probably are ad-libbing at times, etc. So original practices, and I'm interested in the whole idea of a community of theater goers, because that's come across in many of the lectures that I've heard, is that, and you can see it in lines like in Hamlet, where Hamlet is, he's always goading, provoking Polonius, because I tell my students Polonius is always in his grill, right? He's that adult who always, is trying to find out your mystery, the secret of your mystery. And so um, there's a line in there about I think it's when the actors come into Elsinore, and there's a reference to the Polonius playing Caesar. And so, I think most scholars think that, that has to do with that actor who's playing Polonius playing Caesar. And then the more I teach Hamlet, the more I go, it's obvious, what is Hamlet doing as a graduate student in Wittenberg? He's attending plays, and and of course, obviously, you have the play within the play and all that. But let's see, and then there are topical issues, and one of my favorite examples is and James Shapiro's written on this in his book 1606, the Year of Lear, where it's the equivocation of the drunken butler, and I remember being taught that this is just an example of comic relief after the murder of Duncan and all that, etc. But no, it's about the gunpowder plot, and it's about the battle between Catholics and Protestants, and the world of Francis Walsingham and the spy network, and that Catholic recusants were taught to equivocate, to learn how to lie, under oath, right? And so, and it's part of the trial, the gunpowder trial. So it's a topical issue, and so I think, obviously I'm interested in it, but so, um, and then you could do. I keep thinking Arthurian legends is definitely something that's taught in high schools, etc. And in my mythology book, there's a great chart that talks about the evolution of Arthurian narratives and legends. And I teach Chrétien de Troyes Parsifals, or I teach segments of it. And when he visits the Fisher King, it's really the Holy Grail's like a dinner plate. It's not what we associate with the Grail is the cup that was used at the Last Supper that catches the blood of Christ. But in next tellings, I think there's a writer, I think it's Joseph of Arimathea. Again, it's been a while since I've taught this, and I don't think I'm teaching it this semester. So, and then you have an anonymous version that's supposedly written by monks, and they're making a critique of Courtly Love, and the Lancelot figure, and they don't think Lancelot is worthy enough to find the Grail, and so you have this evolution until finally you get to Mallory, and Lancelot is his hero, and Mallory has that interesting history, and then because I took a course in Renaissance literature. Spencer is using the Arthurian legend to fashion a national mythology, and the irony of it is you don't really see either Gloriana, who represents Queen Elizabeth, or Arthur that much in the Fairy Queen. So anyway, I digress. Let's see. Okay, so in Hutchins' second edition, and I think it's in her preface, she acknowledges the radical changes in technology that have occurred between her first book and the second edition. And for example, when you think about it, there's a transition from cinema to video games. And that's I have to admit, I don't play video games. It seems to me a waste of time, but I'm interested in it as a genre of storyteller telling. And as I'm writing my notes down, I remember going to Disney World, and they've got a Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's based off of the movie, which I'm not sure there's an original text for it. And I've always heard that Johnny Depp conceived conceived his character based on Keith Richards, which I think I don't know if that's true. It'd be interesting to kind of verify. Um, but I talked to a colleague of mine who actually did her degree in Britain, and she reminded me of the theater Hades Town, the play. And again, another adaptation, but it's done, and I think again in kind of a bluesy music, and it's interesting to watch that. Then there's Chaos right now on Netflix, which I'm watching to see how they adapt, and I love Jeffrey Goldberg as as who's paranoid that people are coming, he's going to lose his reign, and the I always learn stuff from my kids. There's actually one of the most popular games is actually called Hades. I mean, there's a part of me. I'm a cheap. Just call me a cheap bastard. I mean, I don't want to spend the money for something like that, but I'm kind of curious about it. And then this colleague I work with reminded there are tons of all you have to do is look on Spotify and look at all the podcasts that are on mythology and storytelling. um, let's see. So I'm kind of interested in those areas. Um, but again, I'll get back to pedagogy. Another important book I found on was it ProQuest ebook Central is redefining adaptation studies. And the first chapter deals with how do we teach it, and the writer there talks about, and it's kind of a little history of scholarship, is that there was a term logocentrism that in a way scholars were encouraged roughly about this time to look at the images and cartoons and video games, etc. And so which kind of reminds me of the idea that there's when I go on the adaptations web page, um, there it seems like to me that they're very conscious that this is kind of still an emerging idea, an emerging criticism, and they're looking for obviously new ideas and new papers. So it looks like there's quote opportunity there. Um, and then they've actually written a book, and I need to find it, called The Pedagogy of Adaptation. Um, and I found that I was just doing some searching. it kind of leads me back to Marshall McLuhan and some of his ideas on media because um, again, I think back about that multimodal project that spurred me and kind of forced me to question, what do I know about other media and about the rules there, and that this seems to be part of our future, and so it just makes sense to go back and reread and learn, and then there's a lot of contemporary books written on media that piqued my curiosity. So, the interesting thing, I guess, is in terms of my plan, is I'm slow on my reading of Hutchins, because I want to digest it, and I'm writing notes and thinking about it, and yet at the same time, there's the literature review, or there's the survey of scholarship that's coming up, and so I'm also, multitasking, and as you can see, I'm trying to do both. Um, but I'm kind of I did look at Hutchins' epilogue, or at least some of her last ideas, and she even raises the question. She goes, "What is non-adaptation?" Which I kind of feel that's the case. So I'll cut it short, and I hope that's good enough. I hope I didn't bore you to tears, but that gives you some insights in my directions.